con artist blames me for a mistake he made at my job. So I sabotage his business and cost him $450,000. Here's what happened. Subscribe to Am I the Jerk on YouTube and hit the bell for notifications. So this isn't my story, but my builders from about 15 years ago when they were building my house. The architect for our house was insistent on sash windows, and the only maintenance-free sash windows that were available in my country at the time were only available from one manufacturer. Now, this manufacturer had a very stuck-up and slippery sales rep, who insisted on doing all the measurements himself, including the custom bay window. This rep also dropped a couple of demo windows to show off, and he left them with our builders on site for a few weeks. If you're not familiar, brick construction in the UK comprises of an inner cinder block wall and an external wall creating a cavity for insulation. This becomes important later. The windows turn up on the construction site, and the builders get round to fitting them in. All of them go in fine, apart from the bay window. It didn't fit. This absolute idiot had measured the internal cinder block and not the external brick. This meant the window was slightly small. My ticked-off builder phones the sales rep and tells him that the window's the wrong size and that they need to supply a new one. The sales rep turns into a jerk and blames our builder, saying he supplied the wrong dimension. Their arguing goes back and forth, but the sales rep doesn't budge. Our builder had no other choice than to buy another window, since all the windows were paid for and fitted at this point. These windows were expensive, and the builder was very tipped. At this point, the sales rep still hadn't collected his demo window, and our builder wanted revenge on this slimy sales rep. Our builder gets some silicone bathroom sealant, opens the demo windows, and fills the seams full of the stuff, then closes the window, basically gluing this window shut. The sales rep eventually collects the demo window so he can show it off to a potential client. One of the selling points of these windows was that you could open them up with one finger. So now imagine sales rep in front of a potential customer failing to open this window with one finger. Now imagine the sales rep trying to open the window with all his strength, and it's still not opening. Karma served. The ticked-off sales rep eventually works out that the builder sealed the window shut. He then rings our builders screaming at them, going on about how he just lost a £450,000 contract to supply the windows to a new building development. The builders at this point were in hysterics, and the slighted sales rep threatened to sue them. They never got another word off the sales rep in the end. Moral of the story is, own up to your mistakes. Look, we all make mistakes on the job. Sometimes it can't be avoided. In this case, the sales rep made a goof. It happens. Just own up to it and move forward. You acknowledge what you did wrong and replace it with what it should have been. You give good customer service and hopefully that builder will want to work with you again, or recommend you if someone needs help with something. Instead, you chose to stick to your guns over one window that ended up costing you a much bigger contract. It is unfortunate that it was for such a big meeting and not something more smaller and personal maybe, but hey, builders don't know that. All they know is you had one coming. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some BLAMES music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and don't forget to subscribe. The city wouldn't do anything about my neighbor's pigeon poop covered property, so I took matters into my own hands. I live in a 10-story apartment building in a dense part of a city with numerous other tall complexes, but also a number of old single-family homes. One such home is right next to my building, directly underneath my 8th-floor apartment. The longtime owner has had a pigeon coop in his backyard for years. The birds smell and are a nuisance, but no big deal. Then, about 6 months ago, the owner took it upon himself to dump 20 pounds of bird seeds in his backyard daily, attracting 200 to 250 city pigeons. They're ferals that lived in a park nearby, but once the feeding started, they ended up hanging around my neighbor's roof most of the day, every day. Complaints to him to desist were fruitless. Numerous neighbors also complained to city officials, but they were useless as well. Animal rights activists on our city council who halted a pigeon control program a few years back as cruelty to animals are very pro-animal. They refuse to take action under the pretext that there's no sort of nuisance law the city could use in this case. The smell from the pigeon crap in his yard progressively got worse, and the birds started roosting on our property and cropping on parked cars. Several disgruntled neighbors, including me, pondered a solution for months. A neighbor and I arrived at a solution, artificially escalating the nuisance of the problem, specifically the bird breed, so the city can no longer ignore the nuisance. It had to be logical, secretive, and calibrated. Someone couldn't throw dog poop onto his property and expect an outcome. Long Long story short, we concocted an odorous slurry. Using my 8th floor balcony directly over the pigeon lover's backyard, I gave it a gradually increasing midnight sprinkling of slurry, which disappeared into the grass in his messy backyard. Within 1 week, the increased odor emanating from his property reached half a block away. Suddenly, the problem was resolved. We didn't see the official action, but word was that several prominent businessmen who own a restaurant down the street complained to the mayor about the stench. The city finally took action. The guy is now only allowed to keep 15 pigeoning coops. No more feeding the ferals. An unorthodox solution to a problem that needed to be dealt with. I'll agree that that's not the solution I would have come up with, but it worked out for you. Honestly, it should have never come to this. The fact that the guy's got like 250 pigeons flying around his house, crapping on everything, should be enough of an issue for the city to step in and do something. It shouldn't need to escalate to the point that it did before they act on it. If you're bothering your neighbors and having zero consideration for them and their property, then something needs to be done. It shouldn't come to some wealthy businessman saying something before action is finally taken. Entitled jerks cut in front of us in line at Six Flags, so my dad makes them have to wait in line twice. So for Christmas one year, my parents got us season passes for Six Flags. We used those passes often throughout the summer as a family, and had an amazing time. It was one of these days that this happened. We were waiting in line for one of the more popular rides, which was at the 45-minute wait point. This was relatively good for this ride, as you can wait up to an hour and a half at its busiest points. We got into line excited to share this ride with our dad, as it's one of the few he can ride, as he has a bad back injury that makes just walking around extremely painful at times. As we were in line laughing and making jokes while watching the little TVs they have at various points in the line, a group of people rudely cut us and stood in front of us. Our dad has a habit of not letting things slide, so we all braced ourselves for cover, waiting for our dad to go off on these people for cutting us, when, to our surprise, he didn't say anything. With confused looks, we turned to our dad, wondering why he hadn't told them off and to get behind us. He just looked at us with a look in his eyes, saying, "Wait for it." We shrugged it off and continued our wait. We didn't make it too far into the line at this point, so it was still about a 45-minute wait. As we got closer to the front of the line, we got more and more excited, waiting to get on the ride with our dad and have a great time. The way the line is set up is before you get into the loading station, there's a two-way staircase that has the regular line on one side and the fast pass line on the other side. And at the top of the stairs, there's workers making sure the people in the fast pass lane are supposed to be there. This is where my dad strikes. After waiting the 45 minutes in line behind the cutters, we stood at the top of the stairs, and my dad signaled for a worker's attention. Once he received it, he pointed to the group that had cut us and calmly stated that they had cut us at the beginning of the line. The worker then politely told the group that they would need to leave the line and go back to the beginning. They were ticked, but followed the instructions and left the line. The worker thanked my father for informing them, and suddenly pieces pushed into place in our mind. Our dad purposely waited until the very last minutes made them have to wait another 45 minutes, plus more time, as the line was longer now that it was later in the day and more people had arrived. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched them walk out of the line and back towards the beginning, and just hoped that they learned their lesson not to cut after that. Good for Dad, honestly. That's way better than just saying something at the beginning. I think we've all had this interaction at amusement parks or someplace like it where you have a really long line to wait in. When that entitled jerk goes to cut in front of you, it just kind of bubbles something up in you. You can't help but say something. Whereas Dad in this story showed incredible restraint, and it totally ended up paying off way better. Instead of getting into an argument or a fight with random strangers in line at an amusement park, you just speak up to the staff at the last possible minute and make them have to wait twice as long as everyone else. So much for saving time, I guess. My boss tried to fire me because I looked too good in the uniform. My first job out of school was a language teacher in a private school, and it sounds like it's straight out of a fiction book. I was employed to teach grades 6 to 9. However, because I was the only teacher for that language, the owner begged me to teach grades 1 to 5 when I had any time to spare. I wasn't paid for the extra work. I taught each of the classes I was employed to teach twice a week, and the other classes once a week. Besides that, lunch duties were also added to my work, so I hardly really sad all day. The school had a preschool at a different location, and all the teachers there wore uniforms. The preschool workers, all females, were the only ones required to wear uniforms. I was the only female teacher on the grade 1 to 9 staff. One day, the owner calls me to her office and asks me why I'm not in uniform like the preschool staff. I tell her no one informed me about wearing uniforms in my department, and also the male teachers don't wear uniforms. She gets slightly angry and orders me to sew one with my own money. I try to protest, but I see there's no way getting through to her. My parents convince me to let it go and sew one. When she sees me in the uniform, she goes off about how figure-flattering the uniform is on me, tells me I'm trying to seduce the boys, and calls me numerous names. She orders me to sew a new one or don't come back. My uniform was not short, way below the knee, didn't show cleavage, nor was it tight. I ignore her and she fires me a week later. While I'm in the middle of a class, I just packed my stuff and left. The next day, the principal calls me to tell me the owner's asking why I didn't show up that day. Duh, you fired me. She calls me herself and orders me to come back to work, talking about how do I expect the kids to eat lunch. Good luck finding a donkey like me to work for that pittance. I went back though, but not without double my pay. I then quit the next month. I wasn't gonna put up with that jerk any longer than I needed to. There's numerous things wrong with this story. For one, this is a private school. Why couldn't they afford to pay you for the extra classes you were teaching? Two, why do only the women have to wear uniforms and not the men? Seems pretty sexist if you ask me. And three, if there is a uniform, why isn't it a universal thing? Why are you sewing your own and then being critiqued on how flattering it is? It sounds like it was pretty standard. Honestly, you're just better off to be done with that place. Hopefully you've moved on to bigger and better things. Jerk developer tries to bully my father's client over damages to their house, so they make sure he's not going to be able to sell a single house until he deals with the problem. So my father's a lawyer who makes 80% of his living taking cases where people have been taken advantage of. Not all are poor, but many are, like elderly gentlemen scammed for $1,000 by an insurance company or agent, or charged an extra 3% for a mortgage. So a woman who bought a townhouse in a new development came to my father for help. Her new home immediately developed a mold problem from a leaky roof. About $5,000 in damages. Not a big deal for a developer who just built 200 units. Remember that number. So my father writes a letter to the developer, very matter-of-factly, and explains the situation and requests that he just fix it. Didn't want any money. It's literally 30 minutes to listen to the woman explain the story and to read her sales contract, and another 30 minutes to draft a letter. So the developer comes back with, I'm not responsible for the subcontractor or his work, and it's in the sales contract. There's nothing you can do. You can't even sue me. The contract was probably not written very well, and perhaps onerous, meaning not fair and invalid in certain respects. But the point was taken. This developer was a greedy jerk who thinks he can bully people. Now, my father's client was one of the very first people to buy and move into one of the 200 units built, and every Sunday was an open house where prospective buyers came around to see the units and speak to the sales team with a small office and a truck container. My father instructed his client to make a photo album of the damage, as if the mold was finally getting married. Pictures galore of every instance of damage in the house. On Sunday, they showed up with the album and stood on the sidewalk next to the sales office and invited every single person who walked by to have a look at the album. They did this 2 Sundays in a row, after which they received a letter from the developer practically begging them to let him fix the damage. Apparently, they closed the sale office and had the vast majority of the units unsold. I don't recall the figure, but my father got a cash payment from the developer as well, and of course the damage was fixed. I mean, come on. This is the same as the salesman who measured the window wrong. You gotta stand by your work. If you don't, then that one unhappy customer has the potential to cost you a lot of business. Mind you, this is how a lot of Karens end up getting their way, and forcing businesses and companies to do things that they want so that they won't say something bad about them. But in this case, we had photo evidence, so there's no arguing against the fact that these guys screwed up. They weren't even asking for much, just that it be taken care of as it should be. You gotta do right by them, and stand behind your word. I told one of the moms of my daughter's classmates to screw off and mind her own business. For some context before this story, I, 38-year-old female, cook Asian foods regularly for dinner and for my 7-year-old daughter Lily's lunches at school. This is because my family enjoys these foods. I like to cook these foods, and my mom cooked a bunch of these foods growing up since she's half Japanese. Oftentimes, I'll either give my daughter some leftovers from last night's dinner, plus a fruit and veggie or a snack, or I'll make her a quick little bento box or some other thing really quickly. So after school one day, my daughter wanted to play on the playground for a bit before we went home. I said she could play for a few minutes and she ran off to play. I was waiting next to this other parent who we'll call Deborah. While I was waiting, Deborah came up to me. "Are you Lily's mother?" "Oh, yeah, I am. Why?" "Wow, your daughter's lunches have been bothering my son, and I'd like to ask you to pack something else." "What? How are they bothering him?" She then proceeded to start talking about how her son was complaining about my daughter's lunches smelling terrible, and that he thought it was disgusting. She also said her son didn't eat most of his lunch because he was so grossed out. Okay, I understand your son doesn't like the smell, but can't he just sit somewhere else? Are you kidding me? My son shouldn't have to put up with whatever crap you make your daughter bring to school. It's disgusting. And she started making more vaguely racist complaints, but I was fed up at this point. Listen, I understand your son might not like my daughter's food, but you can very easily just not sit next to her. I'm not changing what's in my daughter's lunches because you and your kid don't want to exist near Asian food. Screw off. She then angrily stopped off with her kid, and my daughter finished playing soon after. So we went home. I talked to my husband about it, and he said that maybe I shouldn't have told her to screw off, to avoid her bothering us in the future. Am I the jerk? I mean, yeah, you could have approached it a little nicer, but she wasn't really coming at you with any sort of decency to begin with. A lot of the time, people get as good as they give. If she's coming at you with that kind of toxicity and negativity, then yeah, you're not gonna be nice in return. I think your argument was perfectly valid, and the way that she's acting entitled is something that she's just gotta deal with. It's not your problem. She and her kid can't control what everyone else eats around them. It's a whole world full of people. You're gonna have to get used to sharing it. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.